If you came across this podcast, you may have typed in, "Do you know him?" If so, who or what are you looking for in life? If you'd like to talk to someone about this, or if there is something you'd like to hear about in a future episode, then please email us at doyouknowhimpodcast@gmail.com. And now on to today's episode.
Welcome to the Do You Know Him podcast. My name is Lowell King. I'll be your host today. Today's podcast is entitled Defining Moment Number 2. If you missed Defining Moment Number 1, at that time I explained that a defining moment, according to the dictionary, is an event which determines all subsequent related occurrences. And how that breaks down for me and what it means to me in my life is it's something that happened in my life that changed the direction I was going. In other words, it completely turned everything around, to be quite frank with you. As I mentioned in Defining the Moment Number 1, I was single, I had a good job, a nice car, nice home, and everything was going in the right direction. I thought I was going to be single for many years, and then Cecilia, my wife, came into my life. And also her son, Ralph, who then became my son. And be quite frank with you, it's been one of the greatest experiences of my entire life. But it never was something that I was planning on happening. It just happened. And as I explained in the Defining Moment Number 1, something that I believe that God actually arranged. Well, he arranged something that was even more dramatic and had such a bigger change in my life. And again, at a time that I wasn't looking for anything new. I wasn't trying to change my life. I was very pleased with everything that was going on. I had added 2 new components in my life, a wife and a son. And I was looking forward to that. And it felt like I was being completed. There was something that was being added to my life that was missing before. And I was really looking forward to that experience. But defining moment number 2 came very shortly after the marriage, actually within a month. And it was so dramatic, it had such a major effect on my life that it's something that I never was even thinking about happening. And certainly I was not looking for any changes, but it did occur. And that moment, the defining moment number 2 that actually occurred was the day that I accepted Christ as my personal Savior. And I know that may turn some people off if they say, well, I don't believe in God, or I don't want to hear about Jesus, or whatever. I am so sorry, but I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm telling stories about things that happened in my life that I think other people might like to hear. And I think they're interesting stories. And I know in this particular case, it had happened in such an amazingly dramatic way that I think that it's worth telling. And I almost can't contain the story because it had such a major effect on my life. Well, having said that, I just wanted to give you a little background because you guys understand that my wife and I knew each other a relatively short period of time. Got engaged in Christmas Eve in 1980, and 1981 on June the 6th, we got married, and then again on July the 4th of 1981, less than 30 days later, is when I became a Christian. But leading up to that, there's a story of things that occurred. I just will tell you very briefly that my wife was involved with a group when we were going out called Crusaders for Christ. It was a Christian group of people that got together and sang songs and listened to speakers and so on and so forth. And I did not participate in that. I did not want to be part of it. I had been involved in a situation in a church when I was younger. I'd grown up in the church, actually, and did all the things you're supposed to do as a young guy going to church. But I never really made that transition. I never became a Christian. I just simply was there because my mom and dad made me go, basically. And I just wanted to, I believed in God. I believed in who Jesus was. I believed that he was God's son. I believed he was crucified, died, and resurrected from the dead. All of those things I believed, but I still wasn't willing to make that commitment. I wasn't willing to let God control my life. I wanted to do things my own way. And to be quite frank with you, they were going in a very good direction, as I mentioned in my previous podcast. You can't really ask very much more than my life was giving me. And now the addition of Ralph and Troy, I'm sorry, Troy's my youngest son, by the way, who was added a few years later. But my wife and my son at that time, and then subsequently, again, my son Troy was added to the family as well. But going back to the situation, because I'm really and truthfully not in any way interested in anything to do, not even going to church, to be quite frank with you. But my wife, right before we got married, had mentioned that this group, the Crusaders for Christ, had announced this event that was going to take place down in Anaheim, California. It was a convention center there, Disneyland Convention Center. And she wanted to know, could I take her or would I allow her to go to this convention? And I said, gee, I really don't think it's a good idea. We just got married, and we should be working on building our family unit and all this and that. Well, that was nothing but an excuse. I simply didn't want to go, and I just was trying to think of something I could say that would calm her down and relax her, so she wasn't so intent on wanting to go to this event. So we had the conversation maybe twice, and then one day we were at a restaurant in Fremont having lunch, and we were sitting at this table for two. It was right in the middle of the restaurant. There weren't many tables available because it's a very busy place. So we were literally surrounded by tables. And it came up again, and I pretty much just dismissed it, and I told her I had to go to the bathroom. I was just trying to get away from the conversation, to be quite frank with you. So off I go to the bathroom, and I come back, and when I do, she's sitting there, and she's got tears in her eyes. And I noticed the people are kind of looking around at like, did you say something to her? Did you make her feel bad? Or, I kind of felt bad. I said, hey, people are looking at us. And she says, well, no, these tears are not because of anything you said. They're tears of joy because I know now that we're going to go to the convention. And I looked at her and I thought, what are you talking about? I didn't say anything about that. But I just kind of let it go because I didn't want to draw any more attention to what was going on that day. So anyway, I took her home, and it was a couple of days. I just thought, I just need a little space here. I'm not going to be talking to her. And then I don't know what happened, but I made up my mind that she was more important than me getting my way on this particular subject. So what I did was I went to her home and told her that, yes, in fact, let's arrange to go. And although I don't want to participate in this event, what I was thinking would happen is maybe Ralph and I could go to Disneyland or do something that, the guys could do, the father-son kind of thing. And I said, you can go and enjoy your event if that's what you want to do. But I said, that's just not of any interest to me. So we made arrangements to go down and got our motel that was right within walking distance of the convention center. And there was a restaurant really close by, so it was very convenient. And we arrived, I believe, Friday afternoon, probably midday. And we pretty much didn't do very much of anything until that night was the event, the first night, the opening event of this conference. So as she was getting ready, my wife was getting ready to go to the event, she asked me if I would go again. And I thought, well, at the time, I thought I really didn't want to go, but I didn't like the idea of her walking over there by herself in the dark, even though it was fairly well lit. But, there's so much that goes on these days. In fact, even in those days when this was many years ago, but still, I just didn't feel comfortable with her walking by herself. So I told her, okay, fine, I'll go tonight. I wanted to make some peace with her about this event. And I thought, well, what's a couple of hours? There really wasn't anything that I would do anyway. So I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and go. So Off we went, and unfortunately, that was probably one of the worst nights of my life. I sat there and I just listened, but I didn't really listen. I let the words go into my ear, but not into my brain, and I allowed them to speak, but all the while that they were talking, I was having a conversation with myself about how stupid I was to make the decision to allow them to talk me into coming to this event. But neither that's neither here nor there. Anyway, the we got through that night. We got home, and there wasn't a whole lot talked about that night about the event. It was late when we got in, and everyone was tired, so we pretty much went to bed. And the next day, we got up and went to the restaurant that was very nearby the motel, and we had breakfast. And the plan was that the event was going to be starting, I think, at 9 or, yeah, I think it was 9 o'clock in the morning. And so we were going to have breakfast, and then Cecilia was just going to walk over to the convention center uh, and enjoy that day of that event. And then Ralph and I were going to figure out what to do ourselves with her absence. So we were walking back towards the motel, and there's a place in this sidewalk where the sidewalk split. And if you went to the left, it would take you back to the motel. If you went to the right, it took you to the convention center. And as we were walking along, I glanced over at Cecilia and I saw a tear going down her cheek. And I thought, oh my gosh, now what am I going to do? She's upset. And again, we're newlyweds. I don't want her to feel bad. And I want to support her, allow her to do what she wants to do. But at the same time, I know she wants to do things with me too. So I thought, you know what? I said, why don't I just go to the first two of these meetings this morning, or conferences, speakers that we are going to go to. So I thought, if I at least go in the morning, then she can have the afternoon, and I've met her halfway. So we take off to go to the convention center, and we sat again. I sat there and listened to the people, just let the words go into my ears, but not into my brain. And I'm thinking these horrible thoughts about the speakers, that they're con men and that they're just trying to get us to open our wallet, and hypocrites and all this kind of stuff that was going through my mind. And all those same excuses that I made, by the way, why I wasn't participating in church. And a funny thing is, somebody said this once, and I'll repeat it because it applies to me personally. If I had gone to church feeling the way that I really felt inside, and doing the little handshake and the smiles that you do on Sunday mornings, and then I left, I would be the biggest hypocrite in the entire church, because didn't want to be there, number one. Number two, I didn't want God to have anything to do with my life. All I wanted to do was just live my life, be under my control, and whatever I achieved, I could take credit for it. That was my mentality. So I'm doing the same thing at this convention. I'm thinking the same thoughts about the people that are speaking. I'm thinking that they're the hypocrites, and they're the person that's just trying to kind of flim-flam man, if you ever heard of that terminology. But the person who's a con man, a car salesman type, that no offense to car salesmen, by the way, but you know what I'm talking about. That perception of people that there's this person that is just trying to take advantage of you. But anyway, so the first speaker, I don't even have a clue what the guy was talking about. We went to his second speaker, and he was a little bit of a different kind of situation. They called him the Playboy Priest, and that was kind of intriguing title to begin with. His name was Kenneth Roberts, and it turns out that Kenneth was a gentleman from, I believe, from England initially. He had a bit of an accent, and he was dubbed the Playboy Priest, and that intrigued me. I'm trying to figure out what in the world that meant, and so went in to listen to his talk, and he started to explain that his background, and he was saying that he had come from a background of pretty much a jet-setting background. He had been involved with fairly well-to-do people pretty much most of his life. He did some things that probably were questionable. I'm certainly not going to judge him or even bring up any of the negative things that he talked about, and even though he talked about them, but I just don't feel comfortable doing that. But he wasn't engaged to a young lady who was an heiress, and she was, or heiress, I'm sorry, and she was going to inherit quite a bit of money from her family, and pretty much his life was going to be the life of the rich and famous kind of situation once they got married. And his life was pretty well planned out. All he had to do, get married, have a few kids, and the family would take care of all of their financial needs. And so he was looking forward to this relationship kind of coming together and being formulated with this marriage. And so he had been to many of the homes of very wealthy people, but in this particular day, he had a special occurrence that had happened when he was at a cocktail party at a fairly well-to-do family, and I don't want to misquote the name of the company, so I won't mention it, but it was a fairly large candy company that was a nationwide company, and he said that he found himself somewhat separated from the crowd, and he was walking down a hallway, and he happened to see a door that was open. And you're walking along the hall and you see a door open and you just kind of glance because you're wondering how it's furnished or who's in there or whatever. And when he looked, he said there was nobody in the room, but there was this massive fireplace with a mantle, and on top of the mantle, even from the doorway, he could see a picture, fairly large photograph of a very beautiful woman. And so he seemed to be drawn to this picture. So he went to the picture, and he was looking at this young lady, absolutely gorgeous, movie star quality. I mean, just really attractive. And he's thinking in his mind that he would like to meet this girl. And as he was standing there, all of a sudden he heard a voice behind him say, "She's beautiful, isn't she?" And Kenneth said, "Oh my gosh, she's absolutely gorgeous." And then he turned around, and the lady said, "We lost her last year." And he said, "Oh, what a tragedy." He said, "She's such a young girl." And the lady said, "Well, she didn't die. She became a nun." And he says, "A nun?" He says, "Yeah." "Well, where is she at?" And the lady said she is in Calcutta, in India. She's working with Mother Teresa, working with the poor in India. And we want her to come home. So they had this long conversation about the fact that the mom was telling her the background and explained to Kenneth. And she told him finally, she said, "You know what?" She said, "Would you be willing to go to India and try to bring her home? Because if you would be willing to do that, obviously I would pay for all of your expenses. But my gosh, if you could get her to come home, you could pretty much name your own reward for bringing her back. But we just want her back home. If there's any way you could possibly fit that into your schedule." And he said, "Well, I'm pretty loose actually right now because our marriage is scheduled out about 6 months from now. And so I do have time." And so they made an arrangement, and off Kenneth went to India. Well, during the presentation, he gave a very graphic explanation about what occurred when he got to India. And he said that he had arrived at a very bad time, apparently. Good time for the Indian people, but he was there during some kind of a big religious festival. He didn't know exactly what it was, but I know that he said that the whole event led to a time of people bathing in the Ganges. There were parades everywhere, And he said that the traffic was amazingly bad. But the worst part of all of this is the fact that there was just thousands and thousands and thousands of people. He didn't know the total number, but it was just mobs of people. And again, they were blocking the streets and everything else, so it took a long time to get through. It's a hot day, so they had their windows down on the car trying to cool off. And the stench, the odor of many of these people probably hadn't bathed for who knows how long. And so there's an amazingly horrible body odor, first of all, that he was experiencing. And secondly, he said the flies. And he said the flies, there were a lot of people, not only normal people, but then there were many people that had leprosy. And so you have rotting flesh. That's another odor that joined the sensation of it all. But he said the flies were amazing. They were landing on the people and then landing on other people, even from the lepers on those open sores, and now landing on him. And he said he just wanted to do what he had to do. He just wanted to get it done, get it over with, bring this young lady home if he could, and then get back to America, because he did not want to continue to stay at that time. And by the way, I know many people who, not only from India, who are friends of mine, but also people who have traveled to India, and they've never had a story that was anything like this, but they've had many, many beautiful trips to India. But this happened to be a really bad experience for Kenneth Roberts. So anyway, he contacted the convent once he had checked into the hotel. He arranged for a meeting with the young lady 2 days later, and so he didn't do very much sightseeing. He just stayed by the hotel as much as he could, and just waiting for this meeting to actually occur. So 2 days later, he shows up at the convent, and he was told to go to this little room, and the room was kind of attached building that was nearby the main building, but it had a dirt floor, and it had just a wooden chair, two chairs, wooden chairs, and a wooden table. It was very, very simple. No decorations on the wall. If you can just visual, almost like a prison cell almost. And so he went in the room, and the young lady, the nun, was waiting for him, sitting at one of the chairs. So went in and spent some time with her, explained to her the things that the mother wanted him to say, made the appeal for her to come home, and just tried to explain how much the family was missing her and that they really, really wanted her to come home. And she just looked at him and she said, Mr. Roberts, I appreciate you coming and so on and so forth, but there really isn't very much more that you could say because everything you're telling me I already know. But she said, I don't want to go back to that life. I'm very happy here working with the poor, and I just want to do what I'm doing now. I don't want to go back to the lifestyle that I lived back in America. And he just looked at her. He couldn't understand it, because that was the very thing that he was striving to achieve, was the very thing that she already had. And he just didn't understand it. And he looked at her and he says, sister, I just want to say this. If I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but he said, this has been a really bad time for me to come. And this whole experience of coming here has left me with a bad taste in my mouth about this whole city, the way things are here. And he said, I just have to ask you this one question. I'm looking around at your lifestyle here is very humble, which I understand that's the way it is with people that are in the ministry. But he said, you have experienced, I've been to your home, so a beautiful home to live in, a mansion. You have traveled, you enjoyed the best food all over the world. You have beautiful clothing, and the list goes on. A nice car to drive, whatever. He says, but here you have nothing. he said, "How do you live in this filth?" And she stopped for a moment and thought, and then she looked back at him and she said, "Well, Mr. Roberts, how do you live in your filth?" And it was like that comment that just penetrated not only his heart, I'm sure, but it certainly penetrated my heart as well. As I listened to this young lady who has rejected everything that anyone in America would think would be achieving the ultimate, and rejecting that and then saying, how could you live in that filth? And he knew exactly what she was talking about, the lifestyle he had been leading. But it was what he wanted out of life. And even though it wasn't completely fulfilled, he just thought, like I did, that as he moved along in his life, obtained a family, has children, so on and so forth, maybe has a job and been able to be successful in it, that all of those things would bring fulfillment and fill that void that was in his life. So he was on the same course that I was, so I could relate to a lot of what he was saying. Certainly I wasn't in the jet-setting crowd that he was in, but I think, it's a common human desire to move along and make these achievements and bring your life together, and family and friends and the home that you have and all that. Those are all just kind of the American dream, I guess you call it. And we all believed, or at least I did until then, that was going to be the fulfillment. That was going to be the thing that was going to fill that vacancy, that void in my heart. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, she bid him adieu and told him that she appreciated him coming, and she sent messages back to her family of her love for them, and sent him back home to deliver the messages to the mother, and that she was not going to be coming back. And in her closing, as they were getting ready to leave, she said, "Mr. Roberts," she said, "I want you to know something. I'm going to be praying for you to become a priest." And he looked at her and laughed, and he said, "Sister, why would you even consider putting me on your prayer list to become a priest?" He said, "I have everything that I want in life, and the only thing I'm lacking is the family and the wife that will fill that gap for me. And I'm fortunate enough to be marrying somebody who's quite wealthy, and we love each other, and we just want to move on with our life and do what normal people do." And so she said, "Well, I'm going to pray for you to become a priest anyway." So he said that probably just weeks before the wedding, that he was under such enormous conviction. I don't want to speak for him, but I'm just going to say what I think happened to him. I think that God pursued him in such a way that he finally couldn't take it anymore. And he finally got on his knees, like a lot of people do, and said, "Lord, do with me as you see fit. Have your own way. Show me what you want me to do." He finally just broke down and let God take control of his life. And as a result of that, he did become a priest. He had to cancel his wedding, and I don't know all the details of that, but I'm sure his fiancée wasn't very happy. Well, anyway, I left that day after listening to him and thinking, he had a great story, and I'm glad to see his life got turned around and he got his priorities, I guess, straight. I wasn't really sure exactly what all of the things that were going on in his life, but, I walked out of that room thinking he's a great speaker and he's in the right place. He's telling a good story, but it had no effect on me whatsoever. Zero. I actually would have probably bought his book if there was one available, but it didn't change me in any way. It didn't make me feel like I wanted to have what he had. It simply made me just feel like I was glad I went to hear him because he was the first speaker that I actually listened to at the convention. So my wife and I left that room. We were there at the same time together. We walked out towards the main floor of the convention, and there were multiple booths that were set up. They were, different ministries of different people were doing, and so on and so forth. And everything was focused on this whole convention being a kind of a Christian, Catholic Christian kind of event. And so I had to go to the bathroom, and I was going to go in one direction. She was going in another. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you go and do your thing? She wanted to go over and look at some things on the other side of the building. I said, I'll just go over here to the bathroom, and let's meet back here at a certain time. I think it was 11:30 we were going to meet. So we take off. So as I was walking towards the bathroom, I happened to see this booth, and there was a priest there. He was dressed all in denim, like blue jeans. He was wearing Levi's, and he had a Levi coat, and then he also had the priest collar, so I could see that he was a priest. I think he had some kind of a dark blue coat with a light blue shirt, and then the white collar, so it kind of stood out, and obvious that he was a priest. So I walked over to the booth, and he was talking to somebody else, and I started to look at some of the literature, and his whole ministry had to do with gang members and trying to reach out to the kids in gangs. And back in the old days, when I was a teenager, I had been involved in a street gang. Back in those days, of course, street gangs were not like they are today, but it was just a group of guys that would hang out. We had our name of our club and so on and so forth. But there were clubs all over Los Angeles, and one of the clubs that were not really a good club was in Anaheim, right where the convention center was. And so I was very familiar with the gang mentality of people, and the fact that there was a bad gang that I was aware of in Anaheim. And so I started thinking about it, and I thought, I'm fortunate because as I grew up and became older, I got my life going in the right direction, got a good job, so on and so forth. And so I'm thinking, maybe this priest can actually help some of these young people. So I got my checkbook out, and I'm writing a check. And while I'm writing the check, I noticed that there was a video playing, and I looked over to my right, and here is a gang member. And he's standing next to his car, a typical lowrider, and just all tattooed up and talking away, and I'm not hearing one word the man saying or young man saying. What I'm seeing in my mind and I'm thinking in my head is, what in the world is this gang member being, so to speak, spotlighted in this so-called Christian convention? And I'm still back on this thing of I'm not really trusting any of these people, although this one priest, for some reason, I'm giving him some money. But I'm thinking they're all here for one reason, and that's just to figure out some way to get some money out of you. But anyway, regardless. So I'm still writing the check, and all of a sudden something he says draws attention to me on the video. Now, the other priest is still over there talking to somebody else. And so I started listening to him. And he's talking about his life before he became a Christian. He's saying that he had been shot twice, and he had been stabbed a couple of times in knife fights during gang-related fights. He's saying that if he had not become a Christian, that he would be dead today, that he would not be there to be able to share the events and the stories of what occurred in his life. And I don't know, he's saying that before he accepted Christ, that he was, that there was this lifestyle he was living, and that his life was focused on him and him only. And I don't know, there was some things that he was saying that all of a sudden they started to really penetrate me. I don't know how else to explain that. and I felt this sensation almost like a knot like a baseball inside of my stomach. And it started to move. It felt like it was coming right up into my chest, and I could tell it was on its way up to my throat. And maybe you've experienced that and you would know what I'm talking about, but I knew that what was going to happen is I was going to burst out in tears, and I was trying not to do that. I'm writing the check as fast as I can. I literally took the check and I threw it towards the priest. I didn't even talk to him, and I ran to the bathroom. And when I got inside there was nobody there, and I went into a stall and I got down on my hands and knees, and I didn't know what was going on. I thought maybe I was going to get sick. I didn't know. It had nothing to do with being sick. It had to do with an encounter with a living God who then began to reveal things to me. And at first I kind of fought it. The tears never stopped. I mean, I was in there for at least 30 minutes, and each time God would reveal something to me, I would finally agree with him and confess it and ask forgiveness. And this went on for half an hour. It happened so quick. There was, I don't even, hundreds, maybe thousands of things that came to my mind. It was just a totally amazing experience. I don't expect that anyone else, I've never met anybody who's ever gone through this, but like I said earlier, the event when you encounter God and he's going to reveal things to you, it doesn't always happen the same way. At this particular day, all of the things that God revealed to me, each time that I confessed it and asked for forgiveness, it was like somebody was taking one more brick off the load that was on my back. And when this half an hour passed and I had become a Christian, I had exactly what Jesus talked about. He said that he would take the heart of stone out of us and put a heart of flesh inside of us, that we would be completely forgiven of everything we've ever done in our entire life, and have the assurance that he would be there to forgive any future things that we might do. I had that assurance. I had been indwelt as he promised. The Spirit of God would become a resident inside of me. All of these things that he promised, I walked out of that bathroom with, and I remember him talking about that he would be a new creature, a new person after this experience. I knew I was a new person instinctively. And he also said that he would always be there with us. I've sensed since that day his presence in my life. I've never felt alone. I have felt peace and joy that I never felt before. And I finally began to understand what being born again means and what it means to have that life, that abundant life that Christ promised. Not abundance in finances or wealth or power or any of that kind of stuff, but the abundant life is an abundant life, which means that you are experiencing all that God can offer you by having a relationship with him. I felt that. I knew that when I walked out of that room. That was the new me. A new me that the whole world had never seen before. And a new me that was about to begin a journey that has lasted up to this point in my life. So we're talking over 36 years. And I hope will never end. Even after I leave this earth, that journey will continue on in a relationship with him in heaven. Well, thank you for listening to this today, because it was just an amazing experience. I wish I could push a button, just push a button and make it happen so that you could experience it. If you haven't experienced yourself, I wish you could experience it just for 5 minutes so you understand what I'm talking about, because a life without Christ is just the way things are. It's settling for something less than what you can really have in a relationship with Jesus Christ. Well, I thank you for taking, again, I thank you for taking the time to listen to this today, because it's so important to me, and so important that I be able to share it with you. So I'm just asking you, as I do in each one of the podcasts, I'll ask you the same question over and over again. The most important question that anyone will ever ask you in your entire life. Do you know him?